I remember the day I asked what time my son's funeral would be. My daughter-in-law, Emma, just looked at me, her face cold and distant, before she replied, "He's long gone." That simple sentence was enough to crush me, but I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my heart sinking, as if my entire world was being ripped apart. The silence that followed felt like 100 years, and I couldn't help but wonder how it had come to this. How had everything turned so cold, so distant? When did my family stop seeing me as a mother, a wife, and simply start seeing me as someone they could cast aside? I had always tried to keep the peace, to make everything work, but now it seemed like I had been living in a lie. I had spent my entire life giving everything for them, my love, my care, my time, but in the end, it didn't matter. Emma's words echoed in my mind, "He's long gone," as if James, my son, had never meant anything to her. The emptiness I felt that day wasn't just the loss of my husband, it was the realization that I was no longer part of their lives, that I was being left behind. The funeral was scheduled for 2 days after that conversation, and I couldn't stop the thought that perhaps I wasn't even invited. It wasn't like the old days, when my son and I would plan everything together, when we'd share our hopes and dreams for the future. Now, he was gone, and with him went all my hope of ever being truly needed. I had spent so many years caring for them, raising them, making sure they had everything they needed. And what did I get in return? A cold dismissal. "He's long gone," Emma had said, but to me, the world felt like it was spinning without purpose. I thought back to the times when James and I would sit down and have dinner, just the two of us, talking about life, about what was to come. I thought about the promises he made me, the promises he would always keep. But now, those promises seemed to have evaporated like smoke. I looked at the empty room, the silence so deafening it hurt. I thought about how Emma had changed since the day she married James. At first, she seemed like a sweet girl, someone I could share my life with, someone who would care for my son just as much as I had. But somewhere along the way, she became someone I barely recognized. Her coldness, her indifference, it was as if everything I had done for them meant nothing. I had never been good at standing up for myself, never been good at demanding respect. I had always been the one who put others first, who did everything for my family. But now, in the face of their cruelty, I realized I had to do something. I couldn't just let it slide. The pain of losing my husband was one thing, but the pain of being cast aside by the people I loved most was unbearable. I was tired of pretending everything was okay, tired of pretending I was fine with the way they were treating me. I had always kept quiet, but now I was ready to stand up for myself. The question was, how would I do it? How would I confront Emma, confront my son, and make them see what they were doing to me? I didn't know yet, but I was determined to find out. My life had been turned upside down in an instant, and I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. Something had to change. And it was going to start with me. I woke up the next morning with a sense of heaviness in my chest. The words Emma had said still echoed in my mind. "He's long gone." It was as if I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, suffocating me. I went through the motions of the day, making breakfast for myself, though the house felt empty without James. I glanced at the clock and saw that it was almost time for the funeral. I still hadn't heard from anyone about the details, and that familiar feeling of being forgotten, of being on the outside looking in, began to settle in. I tried calling James' number, but of course, it was disconnected. I dialed Emma's number next, hoping she might at least let me know when I should be there. The phone rang a few times before it went to voicemail. "I'm sorry, but the person you're trying to reach is unavailable," the message said, leaving me more confused than ever. Why wasn't she answering? Was she avoiding me? I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, feeling a wave of frustration rise within me. I had done everything for them. For James. For our family. I had been the one who always made sure everything was in place, who kept the peace, who cared for them when they needed it. And now, in the hardest moment of my life, I was being pushed aside. I thought back to the time when James and I would talk about everything, our plans for the future, our hopes, our dreams. We were a team. And now, he was gone, and I was left with nothing but silence. The silence was deafening. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit back and let them decide everything for me. I had to know what was going on, why I wasn't even being told when to be at the funeral. I decided to drive to the house. Maybe someone would be there, maybe they were just busy, and I had misunderstood. But as I drove down the familiar road to James' house, I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something didn't feel right. I parked in front of the house and got out of the car, walking up the driveway. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear voices coming from inside. As I stepped into the foyer, I saw Emma sitting in the living room, her back to me. She looked up, and her eyes immediately hardened when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone sharp and cold. "I came to find out what time the funeral is," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger and hurt bubbling up inside me. "It's already been taken care of," she said dismissively. "Don't worry about it." "Don't worry about it?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You're telling me not to worry about the funeral of my own son? You didn't even bother to call me and tell me when it was." "I had to figure it out myself." "I didn't think you needed to be there," she snapped. "You're old, you're not in any condition to be part of this. Besides, James is gone. What's the point of dragging it out?" The words stung, and I felt my chest tighten with the force of them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You don't get to decide that for me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though my hands were shaking. "I'm still his mother, Emma. I still deserve to be part of this." She rolled her eyes and sighed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. James is dead, and we're all just trying to move on." Her cold indifference made my stomach churn. I wanted to scream at her, to make her understand how much pain she was causing me. But instead, I stood there in silence, holding back the tears that threatened to spill. "Fine," I said, forcing the words out. "I'll leave. But don't think this is over. I will get the answers I need." I turned and walked out of the house, my heart heavy with the realization that I was truly alone. No one cared enough to include me in the most important moment of my life. The funeral had come and gone, and I had been left out in the cold, just like I feared. But this wasn't the end. I wasn't going to let Emma or anyone else erase me from the family. I would fight for what was mine. I would find a way to make them see what they had done to me. It wasn't just about the funeral, it was about respect. It was about family. And I wasn't going to let that go without a fight. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The funeral had come and gone, and I hadn't been there. No one had called to check on me. No one had asked if I was okay. It was as though I had never existed in their lives. The emptiness I felt was suffocating, and yet, there was something else, something stirring deep inside me. A sense of injustice, a feeling that I couldn't just let this slide. I had been pushed aside, but I wasn't going to let that be the end of my story. The days passed slowly, and every time I tried to make sense of what Emma had said, "He's long gone," I only became more determined. They thought they could push me out, erase me from the family, but I knew deep down that I deserved more than that. I deserved respect, love, and a place in their lives, especially after everything I had done for them. It was then that I realized I needed to take action. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I wasn't going to stand by while Emma and my son made decisions about my life without even consulting me. I needed to find out the truth. I needed to know what they had planned for me. I had spent years being the peacekeeper, the one who always made sure everything was taken care of, but now it was time for me to take control of my own life. I started by going through James' things. I couldn't help myself. There were so many memories, so many moments we had shared. I thought back to the times we would sit together and talk about our future. He had promised me everything. He had promised me that we would grow old together, that we would be there for each other, no matter what. But now, that future was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. As I sifted through the boxes in the attic, I found something that stopped me dead in my tracks, a letter from James. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, just a letter he had written. My heart raced as I opened it, my hands trembling. The letter was short, but it was clear. I've made arrangements for everything, for you and for the house. I've taken care of you, and I want you to know that you'll never be alone. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. He had made arrangements for everything. But why hadn't I been told? Why hadn't he told me about the changes he had made? I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I realized that Emma must have known about this. She must have been part of it. The thought made my stomach churn. How could she do this to me? How could she be so heartless? I had raised her like my own daughter, and this was how she repaid me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played. Emma had taken everything, and now, she was trying to push me out of the picture entirely. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. I stood up, clutching the letter in my hand, and walked downstairs. My mind was racing. I needed to confront her, but I had to be smart about it. I couldn't let her see how much this was hurting me. I had to keep my emotions in check. When I walked into the living room, Emma was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the letter in my hand. "What's that?" she asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "This is what James left me," I said, my voice calm but firm. "He made arrangements for me, for this house. He wanted me to be taken care of, and you knew about it, didn't you?" Emma stood up, a smirk forming on her lips. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to sound innocent, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. "You knew about the letter. You knew about the arrangements. You knew about everything, and you kept it from me. Why?" I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "You didn't think I would find out, did you? You thought you could just take everything and push me aside, but I'm not going anywhere. I won't let you take what's rightfully mine." Emma's expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might snap. But instead, she just shrugged. "You can't do anything about it. It's all legal, and there's nothing you can do." Her words were like ice, but I wasn't backing down. "I'll find a way," I said, my voice low but resolute. "I won't let you get away with this." I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The fight wasn't over yet. I wasn't going to let Emma take everything from me without a fight. I had to figure out what to do next, but one thing was certain, I was going to stand up for myself, no matter what it took. I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Emma. Her dismissive attitude, her coldness, it all weighed heavily on me. I kept replaying her words in my head, "You can't do anything about it." But deep down, I knew she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I wasn't going to be silenced. Not this time. The next few days felt like a blur. I spent hours going through all the papers James had left behind, looking for any clue, any piece of information that would help me understand what he had really intended. But every document seemed to lead to more questions, more uncertainty. It was as if I were fighting against a wall that I couldn't break down. Every time I thought I was close to uncovering the truth, another door would close. I had to find a way to get to the bottom of this. I knew that Emma and my son had been working together to push me out, to take everything from me. But they didn't realize that I wasn't as helpless as they thought. I wasn't just going to lie down and let them take what was mine. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, going over the papers again, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but something told me this might be the moment I'd been waiting for. I got up and opened the door to find a woman standing there. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. "Hi, I'm Karen," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "I used to work with James. I know it's been a while, but I thought you should have this." She handed me an envelope, and I took it from her, confused. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside, I found a letter from James, addressed to me. The letter was short, but it was exactly what I had been looking for. In it, James explained that he had made arrangements for me. He had left me the house, and there were other provisions for my well-being that I had no idea about. It was clear now that he had been trying to protect me, to make sure I was taken care of, but somehow, Emma and my son had kept it all from me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly followed by anger. Why had they hidden this from me? Why had they treated me like I didn't matter? The letter gave me the strength I needed. I wasn't alone in this fight. James had thought of me, and now, it was time for me to make sure his wishes were respected. The next morning, I drove to a lawyer's office. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let Emma and my son control everything. I was going to take a stand. As I sat in the lawyer's office, I explained everything, the treatment I had received, the letter from James, and my desire to make sure my rights were protected. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, she looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "But we can make sure your rights are upheld. It's time for you to take control of your life." Hearing those words gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just going to let my family walk all over me. I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine, for what James had intended. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. But through it all, I remained focused. I knew I had to stay strong, that I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up for myself, standing up for the respect and dignity I deserved. And every time I thought about Emma's cold words, I found the strength to push forward. When the day finally came for the hearing, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. This was it. This was the moment where I could finally take control of my life, where I could make sure that my voice was heard. As I sat in the courtroom, I looked across at Emma. She sat there, her face as cold as ever, but I wasn't intimidated anymore. I wasn't the quiet, passive woman who had spent years keeping the peace. I was someone who had fought for what was right, and I was ready to see this through. The lawyer presented all the evidence, James' letter, the provisions he had made, everything. And slowly, I saw the tide begin to turn. Emma's smug expression faltered. She could no longer pretend that everything was as it should be. When the judge finally made her ruling, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The decision was in my favor. I had won. Emma's plans had been thwarted. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. I wasn't just getting back what was mine, I was reclaiming my dignity. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. I may have lost James, but I had not lost everything. And that was something worth fighting for. I sat in the quiet of my home, the weight of everything that had happened still lingering in the air. The court decision was in my favor, but the sense of victory didn't come with the relief I expected. It came with a cold realization: I had lost my family. I had won the battle, yes, but at what cost? Emma's smug face had faded from the courtroom, but the damage she had done to our relationship was irreparable. I had fought for what was mine, and yet, every time I walked through the house, I was reminded of what I had lost. I looked at the empty chair in the living room where James used to sit. He was the one who should have been there, standing by my side through all of this. But he wasn't. I reached for the photo frame on the mantel, the one of James and me on our wedding day, so young and full of dreams. That was before everything had started to unravel. Back then, we were invincible. Or at least, I thought we were. I never imagined it would end like this, fighting for the things we had built together, only to have them taken from me by the people I had trusted the most. I spent the following days in a daze, trying to find my footing in a life that felt like it had been turned upside down. I didn't want to spend my days stewing in anger or regret, but it was hard not to when everything around me reminded me of what had been taken. Emma's coldness, her manipulation, it all haunted me. I couldn't just let her get away with this. I had to make sure she understood the consequences of her actions. I had to make sure she knew that I wouldn't be pushed aside anymore. But as the days went by, I started to wonder if that was even possible. Could I ever repair the damage to my family? Could I ever rebuild the trust that had been shattered? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe I didn't need to fix it. Maybe the real fight wasn't about winning back what I had lost. Maybe it was about letting go. One evening, I decided to take a walk around the garden, something I hadn't done in months. I used to do it with James, the two of us taking care of the flowers and the plants, talking about our plans for the future. But now, as I walked through the garden alone, it felt like a graveyard of memories. The roses we had planted together were still blooming, their vibrant red petals a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt inside. I ran my fingers over the petals, a small smile tugging at my lips as I thought about the times we had spent here. It wasn't just about the house or the money or the fight with Emma. It was about the life we had built together. And no matter what happened, no one could take that away from me. I wasn't going to let Emma's actions define me. I wasn't going to let her coldness or her manipulation steal my peace. I had spent too many years sacrificing for others, too many years putting their needs before my own. It was time for me to start living for myself. I had won the court case, yes, but the real victory would be in reclaiming my life. I didn't need anyone's approval, and I didn't need their validation. I had spent enough time worrying about what Emma thought, about what my son thought. It was time to focus on me, to focus on the person I wanted to be. I walked back inside the house, feeling a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about living. And that's what I was going to do. I wasn't going to let Emma, or anyone else, take that from me. The past was gone, and I couldn't change what had happened. But I could change how I moved forward. And that was enough. I had finally come to a realization. I didn't need to keep fighting for something that no longer mattered. The house, the money, the family, they were all just symbols of a past I couldn't hold on to anymore. But what I had gained through this struggle, through all the pain and suffering, was a new sense of self. I no longer had to rely on anyone else to define my worth. I could live my life on my terms. The morning after my decision, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. The sun was shining through the window, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I walked downstairs and into the kitchen, where the smell of coffee filled the air. I made a pot for myself, enjoying the quiet of the morning. It was just me now, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I had spent so many years sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. I had tried to hold everything together, to keep the family in one piece, to be the glue that held it all together. But now, I understood that it wasn't my job to carry all the weight. It wasn't my responsibility to make everyone happy. And most importantly, I realized that I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need to prove myself to Emma or to anyone else. I had already proven my worth by living through everything I had been through. I wasn't just a victim of my circumstances, I was a survivor. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the next steps. I wasn't ready to leave the house yet. There were still too many memories here, too many moments of love that I couldn't let go of. But I knew that I had to start making plans for my future. It was time to find my own way, to create a life that was truly mine. I spent the day sorting through the things I had kept, the items that had once meant so much to me. It was strange, really, how things that had once been so important, trinkets, pictures, gifts, no longer held the same weight. They were just objects, memories of a life that was now behind me. I began to realize that I didn't need to cling to the past in order to move forward. The memories would always be with me, but they didn't have to control my life. By the end of the day, I had packed up most of the things I no longer needed. I felt a strange sense of accomplishment as I looked around the room, the clutter now gone. It was as if I had cleared away the emotional baggage I had been carrying for so long. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to face it. The next few weeks were filled with small steps forward. I reached out to old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I started taking care of myself in ways I hadn't allowed myself to before. I joined a local book club, something I had always wanted to do, but never made time for. I spent hours in the garden, the place where James and I had once dreamed together. It was here, among the flowers, that I found a sense of calm I hadn't known I needed. Emma tried to contact me a few times, but I didn't answer. I didn't need her in my life anymore. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I had no interest in getting involved in her manipulations. She could live her life, and I would live mine. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. It was from James' lawyer. My heart raced as I opened it, wondering what it could be about. The letter stated that James had left a portion of his estate to me, as he had intended. There were instructions for the house, and the other assets he had set aside. It was everything he had promised me, everything I had fought for. But the letter also included something else, something that took me by surprise. James had left me a note, a personal message that he had written just for me. "I know you've been through so much," it said. "But I want you to know that I have always loved you. You were my heart, and I hope you find the peace you deserve." Those words hit me harder than anything else had. For so long, I had felt like I had lost everything, like I had been discarded. But this letter, this message, reminded me that I had not been forgotten. James had always loved me. And that love, even after everything, was enough to carry me forward. I sat in my chair, holding the letter to my chest, letting the tears fall. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of healing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew that I was ready for it. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that was enough. I sat in the living room, staring at the letter from James' lawyer, the words still swirling in my mind. He had left me the house, the life we had built together, and a portion of his estate, but there was something deeper in his words, something that filled the empty spaces of my heart. "You were my heart," he had written, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel something other than pain or anger. I had spent so many months carrying the weight of betrayal, trying to process the loss of my son, and now, this letter, his words, reminded me that I was loved. But the reality of life had set in. I couldn't let the past define me, and I couldn't let the hurt control the rest of my life. I was still here, still breathing, still living, and it was time for me to embrace that. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the envelope. I knew what I had to do now. I needed to make changes, to let go of the past, and to step into my future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, where I had left the phone. It was time to make a call. As I dialed the number for the moving company, I thought about the house, the place where James and I had spent so many years together. It was still full of his things, full of memories, but it was also full of ghosts. I had to let go. The house would go, but the love James had left me would stay forever. It was time to make a change, and it wasn't just about the house. It was about me. I needed to find my own way. The phone rang, and when the receptionist answered, I gave her my details. "I'll need a full pack and move," I said, the word surprisingly easy to say. I didn't hesitate. It was the right decision. Once I had finished with the moving arrangements, I sat back down and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the garden James and I had worked on for years. The flowers were still blooming, just as they always had, and for a moment, it felt like he was still with me. I didn't know where my life would go from here, but I knew that I wasn't going to let anyone control it anymore. Emma, my son, they had their plans, their manipulations, but they no longer had power over me. I didn't need their approval, their validation. I had James' love, and I had my own strength. That was enough. Over the next few weeks, the process of moving out of the house began. The movers came and packed up all the things I had once considered my life's possessions. It felt strange, watching everything that had once defined my existence being carefully wrapped and put into boxes. I watched them take the furniture, the pictures, the books, the small trinkets that had been a part of our lives. But as I watched, I realized that it wasn't the items that made me who I was. It was the memories, the moments, the love that remained in my heart. I had been tied to this house for so long, and I had thought that without it, I would lose myself. But as each box left the house, I felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for so long started to lift. When the last of the boxes were gone, I took one final look at the house. It no longer felt like home, not in the way it used to. But as I stood there, I realized that it wasn't the walls or the rooms that had made it a home. It was the love, the laughter, the shared moments. And I would carry that with me, wherever I went. The next morning, I woke up in my new apartment. It was small, not nearly as grand as the house I had left behind, but it was mine. The space was empty, still echoing with the quiet of a new beginning, but I could feel the possibilities ahead of me. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that was all I needed. I didn't need the approval of my son or my daughter-in-law. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was worth something. I knew it now. And for the first time in years, I felt free. I spent the next few weeks settling into my new life. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it be. I started to find things that made me happy again, small things, like reading a book I had been meaning to read, or spending the afternoon in the park, watching the world go by. I had forgotten what it felt like to enjoy my own company, but now, I was rediscovering it. I began to explore new hobbies, reconnect with old friends, and even started taking classes at the community center. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living again. And it wasn't just about filling the emptiness. It was about embracing the freedom to be who I was, without the weight of others' expectations. One evening, as I was sitting on my balcony, looking out over the city, I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayal, the loss, the anger, it had all led me to this point. And in that moment, I felt at peace. I had walked through the fire and come out stronger. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I could handle it. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and I had the love James had left me. That was enough. I woke up to a new day, the first day of the rest of my life. The sun shone through the window, casting a soft glow over the small, simple apartment that had now become my home. It was a far cry from the house I had left behind, but it felt like a fresh start, a chance to breathe again, a chance to finally live on my own terms. I sat up in bed, stretched, and let myself take in the silence. The silence wasn't deafening anymore. It wasn't a reminder of what I had lost, it was a sign of my freedom. I had spent so many years drowning in the noise of my family's expectations, their needs, their demands. But now, the silence was mine. I could fill it with whatever I chose. And for the first time in a long time, I chose peace. I had spent days going through the motions, moving on from the loss, taking care of the paperwork, the moving, but now I could finally take a breath. I had done everything I needed to do. Now, it was time to focus on me. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments when I felt the sting of betrayal. But those moments were becoming fewer. I no longer let them define me. I wasn't defined by Emma's cruelty or my son's absence. I was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my ability to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles in my path. I spent the morning unpacking some boxes, organizing my things. It wasn't much, but it felt good to make the space my own. As I sorted through my clothes, I came across a shirt that James had given me on one of our anniversaries. I had forgotten about it, hidden away in the back of the closet. I held it in my hands for a moment, the fabric soft and familiar. I could almost hear his voice, telling me how beautiful I looked when I wore it. A wave of emotion hit me, but it wasn't the same overwhelming grief that had consumed me in the past. This time, it was different. It was bittersweet, but it was also a reminder of the love we had shared, a love that would always be with me, no matter what had happened since. I smiled and folded the shirt neatly, placing it in the drawer. It wasn't time to dwell on the past. It was time to move forward. As I settled into my new routine, I began to realize just how much I had neglected myself over the years. I had always put others first, my family, my son, my husband. But now, I was learning how to put myself first. I started walking every morning, something I had never taken the time to do before. The fresh air, the quiet streets, it felt like a reset for my soul. I began exploring the city, discovering little cafes and bookstores, places I had never visited because I had always been too busy caring for others. I found a small art studio that offered painting classes, and I signed up without a second thought. It was something I had always wanted to do, but had never made the time for. The first class was awkward, and I felt out of place, but the more I painted, the more I felt a sense of accomplishment, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't just existing, I was living again. As the weeks passed, I felt myself grow stronger. I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me what to do or how to feel. I started making my own decisions, big and small, without worrying about what anyone else would think. I was no longer living to meet others' expectations. I was living for myself. One day, while I was at a local cafe, I ran into an old friend from years ago. We hadn't spoken in years, but seeing her was like a breath of fresh air. We sat and talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed in each other's lives. It felt good to connect with someone again, to feel that sense of belonging. It was the first time in months that I had genuinely laughed, and I realized just how much I had been missing human connection. My life was changing in ways I hadn't expected. I had always thought that happiness came from the approval and love of others, especially my family. But now, I understood that happiness came from within. It came from the choices I made, from the steps I took to reclaim my life. And while I would never forget the pain I had endured, I knew that I had to let go of the past in order to move forward. It wasn't easy, and I wasn't perfect, but every day I was becoming stronger. And as I stood in front of the mirror one morning, looking at the reflection of the woman who had been through so much, I realized something important. I had survived. I had survived the betrayal, the loss, the heartache. And now, I was thriving. I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that was enough. I woke up that morning feeling different, lighter somehow. It had been months since I had made the decision to let go of the past and start fresh, but today, for the first time, I felt like I had truly moved on. The weight of betrayal, the anger, the loss, they still lingered in the corners of my mind, but they no longer consumed me. I had taken control of my life, piece by piece, and now, it felt like I was finally living for myself. I had spent so many years living for others, my son, my husband, my family, and now it was time to live for me. I walked into the kitchen, the sunlight streaming through the window, casting a warm glow across the room. I made myself a cup of coffee, savoring the quiet of the morning. It was a small moment, but it was mine. I hadn't had enough of these moments in the past. I spent the day doing things I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I went to the local farmer's market, something I used to enjoy with James. I bought fresh flowers and vegetables, and as I walked through the stalls, I couldn't help but smile. It was simple, but it felt good. I was beginning to rediscover the little joys that I had forgotten about. As the day went on, I reflected on how far I had come. I had let go of the toxic people in my life, the ones who had made me feel small and unimportant. I had cut ties with Emma and my son, and while it was painful, I knew it was the right choice. I no longer needed to chase their approval. I was enough. I had been enough all along. The thought gave me a sense of peace. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I was learning to validate myself. That evening, I went to the small art class I had joined a few weeks ago. It was a place where I could just be myself, where no one expected anything from me, where I could create without judgment. As I picked up my paintbrush, I felt a wave of gratitude for this moment. I wasn't just painting on a canvas, I was painting my future. I was creating something new, something beautiful, something that belonged to me. The class was small, but I had started to make connections with the other members. They were kind, supportive, and they didn't look at me with pity. They saw me for who I was now, not for the person I used to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something. I wasn't alone. When I left the class that night, I felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't about the painting itself, it was about the act of creating something with my own hands, of taking control of my life, piece by piece. I knew there was still work to be done. Still challenges to face, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced the darkest moments of my life and come out stronger on the other side. I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that from me. The next few weeks were a blur of new experiences. I joined a yoga class, started taking cooking lessons, and even went on a solo trip to a small beach town I had always wanted to visit. Each new experience reminded me that I was capable, that I could do whatever I set my mind to. I was no longer defined by my past. I was defined by my resilience, my strength, and my ability to rebuild my life from the ground up. One afternoon, as I was sitting at the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle, it had all led me to this moment, this place of peace. I had been through the worst, and now I was standing tall. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I walked away from my old life. I was someone stronger, someone who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I was complete just as I was. I sat there for a long time, letting the wind blow through my hair, feeling the sun on my face, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I would be okay. I had built a life for myself. A life that was mine, and only mine. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And that was enough.